Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. I am sharing some cards made using From Lizi's Secret Garden Mega Pack. This is the newest Mega Pack and it is full of paper. So there are 32 sheets of 8x8 pattern paper, 5 sheets of pearlescent specialty cardstock, and then there are 8 steel dies, and the whole kit is all garden themed, and it will be perfect for masculine or feminine cards. And of course, I always like to use extra cardstock, so this is all cardstock that I add from my own stash. I always start with way more cardstock than I know I'm going to need, but I like to have it on hand since I'm not really sure what I'll be using until I actually get to each of the cards. So let me start with the first sketch. This is MFT sketch number 416, and I've already gone ahead and pre-cut out all of the pieces, so you're not going to see any of my main cutting for this whole video, simply because there are so many papers and it's actually really hard to work with all of them on my desk. So I am just going to show you one of each of most of the designs, and then I'll show you how many cards I made from each of those for each of the sketches. So for this first sketch, which is one of my favorite sketches, if you follow me at all, you'll see this sketch quite often. It's perfect because you can add 2 different pattern papers together. So generally for the background, I'll have a little more muted or tone-on-tone design, and then have the busier pattern for this smaller rectangular piece. And then I went ahead and stamped a sentiment. This is one of From Lizi's stamps. And then just to add a little more interest to that box down there, I'm just putting one of the peel-offs. So I'm using a variety of different colors because even with this same sketch, I have 3 different designs. And so I think some of them are a little more feminine and then some maybe a little more on the masculine side. Another nice thing about using 8x8 pattern paper is if you cut the background, you can actually get 2 cards from each sheet. So for my background here, it's actually 5¼ inches by 4 inches. So I can get 2 background papers from one of the 8x8 sheets. And then I'll just leave my little matting, this little cardstock matting, I'll add 1/8 inch for that. And then when I put it on my card base, I do leave just that thin border of the card base showing. So that's just another 1/8 inch there going all around the card. And this particular mega pack does not include any sentiments or stamps. So I did use other stamp sets just so I can have a sentiment on all of them. But it does include quite a few of these really cute garden themed dies. So for a couple of these cards, I cut out some of these little rubber boots or garden boots, and I used the pearlescent paper. And since there's only one, so you only have either, the right side versus having right and left boots, turning them both out, I still just flipped it over, and then I just used like my bone folder and smoothed out that little bit of the edge because it's technically the back side of the die. But I think it still worked out really cute. And then I'm just popping up the one on the right with some real thin foam dimensional squares. And then to finish off my card, I'm just adding my little banner in the upper left-hand corner. So using this first sketch, I did make a total of 8 cards. And I really don't plan out how many cards I'm going to make with each sketch, just whatever I feel like, or maybe which pattern papers I think would go best for this particular sketch. So now moving on to the next sketch. This is Operation Right Home sketch number 146. And if you are ever interested in any of the sketches that I use in my videos, I do have them over on my coordinating blog post. So I have the picture of this sketch as well as the link to the sketches if I can find it anyway. Some of them aren't available anymore, so I do my best to find them if I can. So for the background papers on both of these cards, I'm using a busier design, but then for this strip that goes across the card, I'm using a little more muted design with just this blue paper and then some of this embossed, let's cut like a spot gloss embossing on it with all of the words. And then just for that banner, since I don't want to add any more busy patterns, I just used some of the gold pearlized paper. And you'll see I did corner round that card on the left. I actually meant to do it on the one on the right, and I just forgot. So one of the cards is not going to have the corner rounded. So now I'm just going to add my sentiment, and I used a couple of different stamp sets from Love from Lizi, and it just has Sending Love. And I used my Misty just to make sure I got a nice good impression with those. And I'm just adding those onto that blue cardstock for the layering. And then if I placed that rectangular piece on the card without any dimension under that top half, it would really sag, just because the rectangular strip that goes across the bottom of the card has 3 extra layers of paper. So just to level that out slightly, I'm just using some thin foam squares. So that way now it's nice and even on the card. And then I went and cut out some of these beautiful hanging baskets. So this is one of the dies that's included in the kit. And all of them are very intricate dies, except for maybe the boot. So I do use wax paper whenever I cut out dies that have all of this extra detail to them. And then to adhere it, I'm just using some liquid glue. I just try to make sure to cover that the best I can and firmly press it on the card. And it always holds really well with the Nuvo Deluxe adhesive. And then just a little finishing touch, I'm adding just a couple of the stitched circle dies in the upper right hand corner. And I do like to add a little piece of pattern paper to the inside of my cards, but for most of my cards I actually didn't, because I didn't have enough extra paper. So for this sketch I made a total of 8 cards. Next up is Sweet Sunday sketch number 239. So I'm going to make 2 different card styles for this particular sketch. So this first one, I'm using this fun bug paper, and then I just use polka dot paper for this little rectangular piece, since most of that's actually going to be covered up with that main rectangular box on the front of the card. And then for the other card, I have this really pretty butterfly paper, and then just a light plaid design. So before I get going on any more of the card, I'm just going to add those card fronts to the card bases. Sometimes I wait to do that, depending on if I'm going to add any peel-offs or ribbon that I'd rather wrap around the card. And then of course sometimes I forget about it and I've already adhered it and I just make it work instead. So for this rectangular box that's going to have the image and the sentiment, I decided to add just a couple of peel-offs to the lower part of it. So I'm using 2 different sizes on each of them. And I will be using several different peel-off colors throughout this whole video, but I will include a link to all of the colors that I use. And since I do get asked quite often where I get the peel-off stickers, these are an exclusive item to Love from Lizi. So they can only be purchased directly through her website, and she is based in the UK. But they are amazing and I use them all the time, so I think that little extra shipping is definitely worth it. So now I'm going to create sort of a little scene. I cut out a couple of the little benches using some of the pearlescent paper, and then also this little pot of tulips using some gold satin paper that was in a previous kit, and then just some cardstock, that maroon cardstock for the background on the one on the left. And I'm just going to attach all of those with some liquid adhesive. And on the bench, it does have like the little slats where you would sit that would come out, but I decided to leave those in. I kind of liked the look of it. So I just put a strip of score tape behind just so those little pieces wouldn't pop out later. And then I just stamped a little thanks in the upper corner. This was another Love from Lizi stamp set. And then I'm just adding that little banner in the upper right hand corner. I think with a lot of the sketches I use for this video, in each set, I tend to do like one that's a little more feminine and one that's a little more masculine. So for this sketch, I did make 4 of each, so a total of 8 cards. And with my overhead lights that are so reflective on all of this really pretty glossy and pearlescent paper, sometimes the color of the paper is hard to tell, so my still shots show the truer color. So moving on to the next sketch. This is MFT number 426. So rather than try to cut 2 different pattern papers with this diagonal piece going across and then trying to line them up and fit them perfectly on my card, which I don't think I could actually do very easily, I decided to cut that background piece, just a rectangle, just making sure it was long enough to cover this diagonal piece on this front little piece here. And it made it so much easier, and you're not going to see any of the seams because I did go and add just this thin stripe of the cardstock to put between the two. And then for this sentiment, so I have this little banner die, and I went ahead and stamped the sentiment on there, and before actually adhering all of the layers, I lined it up to see where it would be, and I know exactly where to cut that end so it fit on there perfectly and it would be at the right angle. And then just to add a little more interest between that layer, I'm just putting a couple of peel-offs, different colors for different cards. See, once again, one card is on more the masculine side and the other's a little more feminine. So I really like this sketch, and I think it's going to be another one I'm going to add to my use all the time sketches. And then of course I got to add my little stitched banner to that upper right hand corner. And for this set of cards, I actually made 8 of each design. So a total of 16 cards using this sketch. Now on to the next sketch. This is Mojo Monday, sketch number 86. So for this card, I am again using a busier design for the background. So for all of the other papers, I'm definitely going to look for something that's not busy, more tone on tone, just so it's not all competing together. So for that strip going across the front, I'm using just some of the pearlescent paper, and then just adding this stitched scallop border right below that. And then just a little extra shine or sparkle. I did use a few peel-offs just on the top and the bottom of that strip. This bee paper is really fun. It has more of a fabric feel, kind of like a linen. And then this other pattern paper is just so lovely with the soft colors and all the butterflies and the birds. It definitely reminds me of spring. And I think there are many of us here in the US that are wanting spring to hurry up and get here. It's been a long, cold winter. So now I'm just going to attach those little strips to the pattern paper and then adding that onto the matted layer. And then I'll go ahead and add my card front onto my card bases. So now I've gone ahead and cut out all of these different sizes of the rectangles. And I want to add just some of these really lovely floral designs. This is from Lizi's March release. Beautiful, beautiful flowers, but I'm just going to use just little tiny pieces of them. So I have it all lined up in my mini MISTI of where I want, or which part of the stamp that I want on there. So I'm just holding it down with some washi tape, and I'm even masking out just a little part of one of the flowers just because I didn't like the placement of it. And I'll just go ahead and add some of the cardstock for the layering, and this is just a really dark brown cardstock. Looks kind of black in the video, but it's actually a dark brown. And then just going to add a real simple sentiment. I like a lot of general sentiments, so this one is Hi There, and it's just from an older Lawn Fawn set. I donate so many of my cards to a local retirement home, so it's always nice to have just real simple, uplifting sentiments, and just a general hi is always perfect. So for one of the cards, I cut out this adorable little garden gnome out of the brown pearlescent paper. And then the one on the left, I used a couple different butterfly dies, and all of these were from Love from Lizi kits or some of the add-ons. And so I'm just going ahead and figure out the placement. I want to make sure to get them fairly even. So I do kind of lay them all out first, then I always adhere the one in the middle and then build out with the other two, just to make sure they're nice and evenly spaced. You might notice I do use a lot of ATG, because like I said, I donate a lot of cards and I want to make sure that they all hold together. So for this sketch, I did make 4 of each design again, so a total of 8 cards. So now moving on to the next sketch. This is Sweet Sunday sketch number 286. So now for each of these cards, I have one pattern paper that's on the busier side and then one that's definitely more muted or tone on tone. And now for the background on the card on the right, this is some of the specialty cardstock that was in one of Lizi's add-ons. So I always keep all of it because I know I'll be using it again on another video if I didn't actually use it in the kit that it came with. And then the card on the left is just some craft cardstock that I used a stitched wood grain die for the background, just to add a little extra interest. And then I just added a couple of peel-offs around that blue strip, just to add a little extra sparkle. And then I cut out these really large circles and then also the matted layer for the circle. And then just trimmed off the edge or the end of it, just so it would be flush on the left-hand side of the card. Let's now do the same thing for the other card. And then that rectangle in the back is some of this fabric textured paper, kind of has that linen feel. It's got this green wood grain. And since it has some of that texture, I found that it doesn't seem to adhere as well. So I did put just those couple of pieces of score tape just to make sure it stayed put. And now instead of using a piece of cardstock for this real thin strip, I'm actually using one of Love from Lizi's ribbons that was from a previous kit. Like I said, I always keep all of the extras because at one point I'm going to use them in another video. So this was the perfect color and it matched great with this paper collection. And to adhere that in place, I just use a piece of score tape. So again, since that green paper has that fabric kind of texture, I want to make sure this circle stays in place. So I did put just a few pieces of score tape on there. So now for the sentiments, I used one of the stitch banners again, and I'm just using another general sentiment for you. So I've stamped one in black and one in brown, and I just stamped off some of the ink from the black onto some scratch paper rather than clean the stamp, which probably would have been better, but it worked for me. They're both dark colors. But I still felt like they needed to pop a little bit. They kind of get lost on the paper. So I did add just some of the cardstock as a thin matted layer around those. And then I wanted to use a couple more of the dies. So I have the little watering can again and then some of the boots. And for the watering can this time, I kept all of that little detail on the die, and since I don't want any of that to pop off, I'm just going to put a little piece of score tape behind there, just making sure it all stays together. So for this set of cards, I actually only made 2 of each, so 4 cards from this sketch. So if you are keeping track at all, I am currently up to 52 cards. So now moving on to Mojo Monday sketch number 455. So at this point, I only have 2 full sheets of the pattern paper left. So it's 2 sheets of this pearlescent, really pretty floral background paper. And so I was trying to find a sketch that I would be able to really utilize most of this paper. And so this is a sketch I've never actually used before. I've looked at it and I thought it looked interesting, so I decided to give it a try, and I ended up really liking how this card turned out. So I cut that rectangular piece, and then for the background I'm just using some craft cardstock, layering all of it in this nice green cardstock. Just to add a little extra interest, I put one peel off on the bottom of the card. And then I used some of this beautiful glitter cardstock. So again, this was one of Love From Lizi's specialty add-ons. And I cut out sort of a sun for that upper corner circle. And then instead of putting that really thin strip going across the sun, I did put it behind. And then instead of this little banner in the lower part of the card, I'm using one of the little dies that was in the add-on kit. And then just to make that With Love shine a little bit more, I used some of this gold satin paper for behind there. So I made a total of 8 cards using this sketch. So now I was going to show you all the leftover scraps at this point, but I forgot. I was too busy making cards. But at this point, I don't have any full sheets left. Lots of little strips of paper in some kind of square sizes. So I look for a sketch that's going to work best with the size of scraps that are available. So this sketch was perfect. So it has that nice long strip and then sort of a smaller one going across the front of the card. And then for the background, I can use either solid cardstock, or in this case, I used a variety of different specialty cardstocks. With all of Love From Lizi's monthly kits, she usually has a few different specialty cardstock bundles available as an add-on purchase. So sometimes it's like a satin mirror paper, or it's embossed or pearlescent, but they're always beautiful and definitely worth picking up. Even if you don't use them right away, you will at another point. So again, because some of these papers have kind of a slickness or a little bit embossing on them, I want to make sure none of my pieces pop up off the card. As well as the ATG holds things in place, sometimes it's not quite enough, and then I do just pull out some of my score tape just to make sure it all stays put together. Because that would just be the worst, to give a card to somebody and it fell apart. So that's why you'll always see me use a ton of adhesive. So this card in the middle, I know that reflection is just horrible, but it is this beautiful, really soft pink. So you'll see it better in the still picture, but it is one of my favorite colors. And then just to add a little extra interest to each of the cards, I did add one single peel off to the bottom of the rectangular piece on all of the cards. I love that using just something simple like a peel off adds so much detail to the cards. And there's such a big variety. There's just sort of a plain color, kind of a matte look, and there's mirror, and there's glitter, just so many different peel off colors. So now for my sentiment, again, I'm using one of these little stitch banners. And the sentiment is from Lawn Fawn, and it's a longer sentiment that has "thank you so much," but I only want to use the thank you. So I wrapped the "so much" part of the stamp kind of around my acrylic block. So when I'm inking it up, I'm actually only inking the thank you part. So another way would be to sort of mask it out maybe on using your MISTI, but I find this so much easier if it's just a real simple part that I can ink up without accidentally inking up the rest of the words. So now just to add a little final detail, I cut out a bunch of these little stitched circle dies, and these are made by Lawn Fawn. It's their very smallest size, and it's my favorite thing to use as an embellishment, or of course the little banners. So I'm just adhering those with some liquid adhesive, make sure they stay put. And then here is the other variety of cards I made using this sketch. So lots of different kinds, and I did photograph just a couple of them here just to show you a little bit of the variety. But again, you can see I have a nice mix of very feminine and then some cards, it would be great for masculine cards as well. So now moving on to the next sketch. This is Mojo Monday sketch number 449. So at this point, I mostly just have these small rectangular scraps left over. So I went looking for a sketch that I would really be able to utilize those pieces because they weren't really big enough to use more than one on a card. And even though this is all from the same paper collection, they actually don't all coordinate well together. Like that butterfly paper doesn't really go with this kind of foresty looking paper. The colors are just so different. So instead I am incorporating a lot of solid cardstock or specialty cardstock and then kind of having the focus on that pattern paper. Even though it's just that one little small piece, it kind of will stand out. Of course, the sentiment will be on there as well. So now again, just to add a little extra detail, I'm using a few of the peel-offs on both sides of this cardstock strip that goes down kind of the center of the card. And then rather than using a full strip, since you're not going to see the middle, because there's going to be a sentiment covering that, I did use some of just the little pieces, or I just used one and then just cut it, so that way I didn't have to use two full strips. It's a great way to use up some of those little peel-off pieces that you have left, because you don't want to waste any of those. So now I decided I needed to do some heat embossing since I haven't done it yet in this mega pack. So first I went and stamped the sentiment, and this is another one of Love from Lizi sentiment. It was in a previous kit, but it is still available, so I will add a link in the description box. It was one of my favorite sets because it has just these great sentiments. This one is Have a Beautiful Day. So I stamped it using the silver dollar embossing powder. And I know you can't always see this. It actually looks like it disappears. It's just the reflection of my lights. So after I embossed the one, I went and stamped another one using a different color. So this is, I believe, the forest green color. So another really beautiful embossing color. So then I wasn't sure if I liked that green with the one card, so I thought I'd try one more. This time I used the royal gold embossing powder. And these are all Love from Lizi colors. And you can't always tell what the color is just from the powder color, because it changes once you actually heat emboss it. So go ahead and get my pink heat gun. And this one actually looks exactly the same, I think, as the powder. So I didn't actually like it as much, so I decided to stick with the green and then the silver for the other card. And then I just used a circle die and cut both of those out along with those matted layers. And then I'm just using some ATG to adhere them to my cards. I didn't use a lot of dimension. I tend not to since I donate so many of my cards. And then just that finishing touch, I'm adding just that small little banner in the upper left hand corner. So I did make a total of 12 cards using this sketch. So I have a lot of variety since I had at least 12 of this size piece left over. So I did try to photograph a couple of the extras so you could see a little more of the variety of cards. So now I'm on to my final set of cards. So for each of these, I had these two different size pieces of the pattern paper. It's the same pattern paper, but it wasn't big enough to actually be a full backing for the card, this background. So I just put one on top and one on the bottom, and it was really just like a little sliver between the two. But by adding this pearlescent paper or specialty paper strip between those, it looks like it probably was a full piece of paper, but nobody would have to know. So I did that to both of them, and then you can also see I have a scallop circle cut out of the background of the cardstock, so I will be adding that to the card later. So on the card on the right, I used a couple of peel-offs to separate that blue pearlescent paper. But then on this card, I actually just used some cardstock instead. And then I went ahead and cut out a couple of different circles. I have a scallop circle and then just the regular circle. And then instead of using a stamp this time, I'm actually using a die cut. And this was from a previous Love from Lizi kit. And I like it, it's just perfect. It has this beautiful thank you sentiment on there with a little heart. So I'm just using some liquid adhesive to adhere this down. And this is another very detailed die, but it's very beautiful. And then for the little heart, I used just some small scraps of some glitter paper that I have, just to add just a little extra detail. And then for this card, I did decide to pop up those circles. So I did pull out some of my foam dimensional tape. And then just one finishing touch, I'm just adding that little banner in the upper right hand corner to each of the cards. And I made one of each of these designs because that was pretty much the end of my pattern paper. So here is all of the pattern paper scraps that are left over. I suppose I could probably get another card or two, but I called it done at this point. And this is what I have left of the pearlescent paper, and I'll just add that to my box of specialty paper to use for another kit. So I did make a total of 84 cards using Love from Lizi's Secret Garden Mega Pack. So lots of beautiful fun cards. These work great for masculine and feminine cards. I love all of the paper that's included in all of Love from Lizi's Mega Packs. You definitely get your money's worth. She gives you a lot. And you'll also have all of the dies, so you can continue to use those on other cards. Leave me a comment letting me know which card was your favorite. It's always fun to read the different preferences from people. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and don't forget to give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.